We are back, and despite it being frigid in Chicago, we are only a couple weeks away from Chicago Fire soccer being back as they look to build on a very positive 2025. Departures, additions, lots of news everywhere, and optimism isn't just acceptable, it's probably warranted as we start 2026 here on CHGO Fire. Hello, and let me be the very last, I assume, to wish you a happy new year. We are back. It is season 5, yes, 5 of the CHGO Fire Podcast. No, I cannot believe that either. Thank you for joining us here live on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alex Campbell, and you're stuck with just me today as we're going to recap the Fire's off-season activities. As I'll mention later in the show, we're going to have a preview episode in a couple of weeks, right before the season actually gets underway. So we're not actually that worried about the soccer today. We are worried about everything that has happened off the field this winter before we get to talking about match day 1 in Houston at the end of the month and the home opener against Montreal the following week. And we are going to dive right into this today, and we're going to start with recapping the departures from last season. Some of this is going to be old news, but again, I think it's worth going back over who isn't here anymore because a couple of these deals were big. Brian Gutierrez is the top of the list. We've got this list, if you're watching us on YouTube, of the departing dudes. Brian Gutierrez, after 164 games for the Fire, has joined Chivas Guadalajara in Mexico. Kellyn Acosta, the other big off-season exit. He is now playing for Pogoń Szczecin. I probably absolutely butchered that. He's playing in Poland. Tom Barlow left as a free agent. He's now with FC Cincinnati. Romy Kuame's loan was ended. Omar Gonzalez technically now plays for Fire 2, but I think his role basically is we're paying you a contract of some sort because we'd agreed to do that, and he's mostly going to be a young center back coach. I think basically he's just a mentor at this point. Justin Reynolds has joined Rafael Vicky's Sporting Kansas City. Yes, if you missed that. Former Fire manager Rafael Vicky is now managing Sporting Kansas City, if you can call them a soccer team, because at last check, I believe they have 14 senior players on that roster. Good luck with that. Chase Gasper retired after his repeated injury issues, which, again, it was really unfortunate to see that he was never able to get back to the field. And then Brian Dowd, who played a handful of games for Fire 2, draft pick a couple of years ago out of Notre Dame, was on a loan elsewhere in MLS Next Pro last year. He has departed. His contract was not renewed, and he is now with FC Cincinnati 2. Okay, so obviously the biggest one of these departures is Brian Gutierrez, probably the most successful homegrown signing the Chicago Fire have ever had. If you're watching on YouTube, we got a nice rundown of, a few notes here. As I mentioned, signed by Chivas of Liga MX for $5 million initially. There are potential add-ons there. The Fire reportedly have a pretty significant sell-on clause in this deal as well if he were to play really, really well at Chivas and leave for Europe. Worth noting that this is his club. Brian is a Chivas supporter. His family has lots of connections, and he still has lots of extended family in the state of Jalisco, in and around Guadalajara. So this is very much a really big personal move for him as well as a soccer one. And he just really never kicked on the way I think we were all hoping he would in Chicago because, last year, I think I was not the only one to say this, but I think everybody kind of agreed with Gregg Berhalter coming in. It was kind of put up or shut up time for Brian. And he had a decent season, but just he never became that, national team quality attacker that I think a lot of us hoped he would. And it's really too bad that, after 11 years as a member of the Fire organization, through the academy, signing a professional contract in 2020, that he never, achieved maybe what felt like his full potential. Only Mauricio Pineda, who is the longest tenured member of the Fire at this point, has played more games and minutes than Guti. Pineda first becoming a big part of the team in 2020 right out of college, which allowed him to kind of rack up those minutes. Guti was also recently called up by the Mexican national team. He, of course, has played in friendlies for the U.S., but was not cap tied to the U.S. He has been a youth international on the U.S. side. But again, he's a guy who very much exemplifies the idea of being a Mexican-American with having such strong ties to both countries. Got his Mexican passport last year and is now trying to fight for a spot on the Mexican national team for the World Cup this summer, which obviously would be a huge accomplishment. Probably feels like a bit of a long shot at this point, but he at least does have an outside chance to make the World Cup roster for Mexico. And you know what? If he plays well enough for Chivas to do that, that's going to be awesome to see. And I think every Fire fan is going to be really excited for Brian if he gets that opportunity. The other departure, and this one is, a little less romantic and more of just the price of doing business, is Kellyn Acosta. MLS now, you get 2 contract buyouts per year. This was an expensive one. Kellyn made $1.63 million last year and basically played next to no soccer, which is a tough reality for a guy who just, one of the nicest guys you're ever going to meet around this sport, just a really, really quality dude, Kellyn Acosta. But the math didn't math. You can't be in MLS's salary structure paying a guy that kind of money if he's not going to be on the field. And this is one of the benefits of having ownership with money they are willing to spend, because a lot of teams in MLS would tell Gregg Berhalter, hey, man, burning $1.6 million, literally just setting it on fire to, pardon the pun there, not intentional, to buy out the final year of Kellyn's deal. A lot of teams just wouldn't do it. And they would say, hey, hopefully you can manage the locker room part of this. They might point to, that Kellyn's a pretty agreeable guy and isn't going to be some sort of cancer, in training if he's not playing or whatever. By all accounts, he was not any sort of problem last year when he wasn't playing as much as he would have liked. But that's not the way the Fire are operating these days. Joe Mansueto's willing to spend the money, and this is an advantage of having ownership who wants to really invest in the team to get it as far as it can go. And as we'll talk about in a minute with the additions, $1.6 million of salary space in the cap goes a long way. And so that undoubtedly is in part allowed the Fire, especially in midfield where Acosta has vacated a roster spot, for the Fire to do what they've done this offseason. And so, Kellyn, he's made 357 appearances for MLS teams, Dallas, Colorado, LA, Chicago, former U.S. men's national team player. Again, just really, really solid dude. And much like Brian Gutierrez, I think everybody in Chicago wants absolutely nothing but the best for Kellyn, for his family. And, hopefully he goes and kills it in Poland, and that, his career, continues to be one where he's able to have success and, get a lot of opportunity to keep playing soccer. With that note, let's flip this thing over to the new guys, to the incoming guys, the guys fans can be excited about seeing, the guys who we can debate where they're going to fit in the roster, where they're going to play, because the Fire splashed some cash this offseason. Some of this was kind of expected. Some of it wasn't. So we start at the top here with Andre Franco, who was on loan, of course, from Porto last season, then tears his ACL. I don't know what the original fee for Franco was going to be to pick up that buy option on his loan deal, but it was certainly going to be in the multiple 7 figures. And instead, because of his injury, the Fire renegotiate that, and it gets down to $750,000 with reportedly another $250,000 in add-ons. So, call it maybe $1 million for Andre Franco, who is going to be out likely until after the World Cup. But that's the most obvious deal in the world to do. The risk, given his current health status, is worth $750K for how good he was last season. And then next is, the big one in terms of attention. And hello to anybody joining us very late at night in South Africa. We are very welcome to have you. Glad you're going to be joining us following the Fire this season. Everybody around this team's social media accounts have gained a significant amount of followers because of the arrival of Mbekezeli Mbokazi, the 20-year-old South African center back who played every minute of South Africa's 4 games at the African Cup of Nations over the winter. He comes from Orlando Pirates in South Africa. Only played 1 full year there as a pro, but was on the radar of teams in Europe. Again, he's already a starter for Bafana. This is a guy who with a rapidly rising stock, and the Fire for a reported $3 million bring him to Chicago. This is one to watch. This is the John Duran category of signing, of a guy who is held pretty universally in really high regard, and that is expected to reach the elite level in Europe at some point. So, is this going to be a situation where, he develops with the Fire and becomes a really, dependable standard guy over the next couple of years? Or is this going to be a situation kind of like Duran, where he's here for 18 months because he's so good and some giant chunk of money comes in from Europe that you really can't stop it? I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this season. I think, if Mbekezeli can become a starter in this team. Obviously, if the Fire playing a back 4, their incumbents are Waterman and Jack Elliott. If they're playing a back 3, that does allow maybe more opportunity for Mbekezeli to get minutes. Christopher Cupps is still around. So again, I think that center back position is going to be really interesting this season for the Fire. And then we move on to the midfield, where there might be the most change in the starting lineup. Anton Saletros, the captain of AIK in Stockholm, Sweden, comes in for just over $3 million. Basically was a one-club man at AIK, and we got a chance, the media, to talk to a bunch of Fire players last week, and I asked Anton, hey, why Chicago and why now? And basically he said, it's a World Cup year. I wanted to, have a bit of a different challenge. And, he said he was pretty excited by the way Gregg Berhalter wants to play. So, Sweden, they are in the World Cup playoffs. We're actually going to mention that a little bit later. So they're not in the World Cup yet, but Saletros, he must feel that, trying to earn a starting spot for a Chicago team that wants to be top half in the Eastern Conference, he's decided that's the bet he's making rather than simply staying at home with AIK. The Fire also bring in Robin Lod on a free agent signing. He's been with Minnesota United for a while. Super, super versatile player. Can play in attacking midfield, can play on the wings, can play in defensive midfield, can play striker if you need him to. Could probably play fullback if you asked him to. Just a really solid all-around veteran pro who's racked up a lot of minutes in MLS. And then we get to a couple more peripheral ones here, but still worth noting. We have a second South African signing with Puso Ditajane. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. $1.5 million coming from TS Galaxy in South Africa. He is a South African youth international, is thought really, really highly of. We'll see where he ends up playing most of his minutes this year. My guess is you're going to see him as kind of a locked-in starter for Fire 2 and a guy who's going to provide wing depth for the Fire, who, you got to remember, are playing Open Cup this season, are playing Leagues Cup this season, in addition to the MLS slate. So there is going to be no shortage of minutes to go around. He also just reportedly got all his visa stuff sorted and his paperwork sorted, so he is not with the team yet. I think the hope is he's going to arrive in the next couple of days and be able to then be with the team when they leave later this week for Coachella to play a few more preseason games. Josh Cohen, one-time called-up U.S. men's national team goalkeeper, never made an appearance. He arrives on a free from Atlanta United. Cohen made his career over in Israel, playing professionally there for several years. This is a bit of an odd one because the Fire were not planning on signing a goalkeeper this offseason. The plan was that Jeff Gall's your backup, and then they've got a couple kids coming out of the Fire academy system that they feel really good about and that, they wanted to get Fire 2 minutes. Without, again, this is not something that's been reported out, but the only conclusion you can draw is this is something that happens because of the way that game against the Philadelphia Union in the playoffs went. And that the Fire, I won't be surprised if Jeff Gall is still the guy who starts the year as Chris Brady's backup. But, Cohen has come in, and Chris Brady the other day really praised his intensity and training, veteran guy. And so it's going to be interesting to see who's the second goalkeeper on the bench day one when the Fire go down to Houston in a couple of weeks. I think that is just roughly worth watching. And then the one guy who gets the call to the big leagues this offseason is Jason Shukaluk, won the Golden Boot in MLS Next Pro last season. The Fire haven't really signed a backup striker to fulfill the role that Tom Barlow was serving last year, so it sure looks like at the beginning of this year that Shukaluk is going to get the chance as Kuiper's number one understudy. Again, lots of games this season, lots of minutes to go around. But as we're going to touch on here in a minute, the Fire, as you might be aware, are in the market for another striker. Before we get into that, though, I do also want to note a guy, I'll get the standard English commentary cliche out of the way now. A guy who might feel like a new signing this season for the Fire is Chris Mueller, the Chicagoland native who missed the entire 2025 season after being diagnosed with pericarditis. That's a heart condition that affects the lining of the heart and causes inflammation. He was shut down for the remainder of the year, even after he was kind of deemed, physically able to re-participate in training. They didn't want to rush it, but he has been fully cleared. He's been playing in preseason. It's kind of crazy to think that Chris Mueller has been around this team since 2022. Chris Mueller has been a member of the Fire basically as long as we've been doing this podcast. Neither one of those things feels like it has been for 5 years, if I have to be honest. So, we're going to see what role he plays. Again, he's going to start the season probably as, a depth option at the winger slots. You figure that Philip Zinkernagel, Jonathan Bamba, they're the incumbents. But Chris Mueller, Marin Haile Selassie, those are really, really solid options to have off the bench. And again, in a season where you're going to play a lot of games, it kind of goes along with the theme. The Fire are deeper this season than they were last year. I mean, to use an example, and this is no offense to Sergio Orejel Jr. as a player, he's a young guy, though, and he went into last season as kind of a default starter in the midfield because Gregg Berhalter liked him. He earned that spot, and that was kind of his for most of the year. Saletros, Lod, those guys coming in, that's going to change that equation a bit. And really, when Andre Franco comes back, that really is going to make it harder for Orejel to be getting minutes. You look in the wing depth positions, there's a lot more there. Really, other than striker, the Fire feel like a deeper team this year than they were last year, which means it is time to get into the silliness of this offseason, and that is the links to Poland's all-time leading goal scorer, Robert Lewandowski, currently of Barcelona. Yes, as our friend Alex Calabrese and others have reported, this is very much a real thing. The Fire have been trying to, they've been in touch with Lewandowski's representatives for a while. These meetings are happening. This is this year's Neymar, this year's De Bruyne. The Fire are going for this. His Barcelona contract expires this summer, so you do have to, though, ask yourself, how interested is Robert Lewandowski in joining the Fire versus how interested is Robert Lewandowski in using the Chicago Fire and Joe Mansueto's deep pockets as leverage to get paid more by Barcelona. This is a guy who's 37 years old. He's not getting any younger, but he's, still killing it at the top level of the European game. Should note, they are not qualified for the World Cup yet either. They play Albania on March 26th, and the winner will face the winner of Ukraine and Sweden on March 31st. So there is a world here where you have Robert Lewandowski and also former Fire winger Przemysław Frankowski playing against Anton Saletros with a spot in the World Cup on the line. That is a thing that could happen and would probably be the most interested Chicago Fire fans have ever been in a European World Cup playoff game. Lewandowski, he's a global star. He's got 113 goals in 173 games for Barca. That's after 344 in 375 at Bayern Munich. Made his name at Borussia Dortmund. Again, if the Fire get him, the questions about, what do you do with Hugo Kuipers immediately become way secondary.
But also the Polish population in Chicago would be on fire. I saw...
Pun intended, because it's worth it in that case.
I didn't even think of the pun. So, that's just bad speaking by me. But I drive by a Polish community all the time. There's a Lewandowski jersey for sale in one of the shops. And it's like the old Bayern Munich that I think it's been in there for like 12 years. That thing's going to be sold out the second he signs with the Fire.
If Lewandowski signs for the Fire, I hope that both the Fire and, Chicago Soccer or whatever they were renamed up on Western Avenue in Lincoln Square, and anybody who's a purveyor of sportswear that is even remotely soccer related better be ready, because I think actually this is a good comparison. It's like, this whole thing we have with the Chicago Pope and the Pope being a White Sox fan, it would be beyond that level, because this is Robert Lewandowski is like Polish soccer god. And so like if this happens, and again, this is something that the Fire, it'd be great to see them try to get back to, is really trying to tap into when they can. Don't just go out of your way to do it for the sake of it, but the Fire in recent years have really had a lack of Mexican players on this team. They've had some Mexican Americans like Brian Gutierrez, which obviously that does count. But there's a lot of Polish history with this team, obviously with the city, and you look at, the opportunity for all of the immigrant diaspora communities in Chicago. It's one of the reasons watching the World Cup in this city this summer is going to be so great, because you're going to be able to just wander around the city and you'll find people with fandoms all over the world tuning into games. And it's going to be, for all the other problems this World Cup might bring with it, I think Chicago is going to be a place where you can really enjoy the festivities of the soccer aspect of it. And so, if Lewandowski comes to the Fire, and if this happens, in theory, it would be after the World Cup. There is the question, what if Poland don't qualify for the World Cup? And how does that affect things? Because then, you'd probably give him some time off. Again, you worry about how him and Kuipers exist on the same roster later, because, in a perfect world, if you can imagine Robert Lewandowski coming into a Fire team in September that's like charging for the playoffs, and you get that shot in the arm with, say, 8 or 10 games to go into a playoff run, you'd immediately, you can't be favorites in the Eastern Conference because Miami exists, but you could be real scary to just about anybody if Lewandowski comes into this team. Obviously, even at 37, no signs of slowing down. So, again, this is one to watch. Again, the Fire were very, very close to signing Kevin De Bruyne. That was a thing that nearly happened. I would be shocked if they don't get as close here, because the Fire are going to be willing, I imagine, to match whatever Barcelona is willing to pay. We saw Kevin De Bruyne be offered $12 million a year last year by the Fire, and I would expect Lewandowski to be offered a similar level of money, maybe even more. Messi's on-book salary is like $20 million, so if you can kind of guesstimate where that lands him, it's going to be really fun. Again, that particular playoff route to a World Cup spot in Europe with Ukraine, Sweden, Albania, and Poland. Fire fans, we'll talk about it on the show. Let's be honest. Like at the end of March, we're going to talk about those games because it is potentially going to be extremely Fire relevant. Okay, a few more things before we get out of here. Fire preseason so far, they started off with a quick trip to Florida. They got wins over Nashville and Sporting Kansas City. One of those feels a little more notable than the other, but it is preseason, so you can only put so much stock in any of it. They are back in Chicago this week. They played a closed-door friendly against Indy 11 yesterday. This is Tuesday as we're recording this, so we got nothing except a bunch of pictures, which basically showed everybody playing. Most likely that's one of those games where they play 3 35-minute halves, just basically for the purposes of Gregg Berhalter being able to get everybody out there. So again, can't really know anything from that. What we will be able to see, though, is the Fire at the Coachella Valley Invitational. Every year it's a bit of a crapshoot. Are these games going to be streamed? Which team's website are they on? But hopefully we are able to watch all of these. They're going to take on the LA Galaxy, Austin FC, and the Portland Timbers between February 7th and February 14th. And then they're back in Chicago for literally a week, not even. And then they're in Houston for the season opener. So hopefully we get to see the Fire in action over the next couple of weeks in preseason, and that then allows us to, have our thoughts about what the lineup's going to be on day one. What do we think of what we're seeing from Berhalter? Is there anything of note that's particularly interesting going on? Big offseason news in MLS that isn't the Fire is that MLS is officially changing the schedule for the 2027-28 season. It will be. That will be the first year that MLS goes onto the European schedule. So that will be from August to May with a winter break in the middle. If you're familiar with how the Bundesliga in Germany works, they take 3 weeks off every winter. MLS going to be doing something similar, though. The Bundesliga one is kind of centered around the holidays. Given the climate of the United States, I think it might actually be better if that break came in January/February. We've seen it lately. This is when the weather is the worst around here, not Christmas. So, again, we don't exactly know what that's going to look like yet. There's going to be this weird short 14-game abbreviated season in the spring of 2027. That's a big mix up there. No idea what that's going to look like. It's going to feel probably pretty dumb, but you're not just going to sit around for 6 months, so why not? I think the biggest upshot of this is the playoffs now are going to be in May. And MLS Cup is not going to be played potentially in frigid, awful weather that kind of detracts from the soccer. You are going to have the playoffs in the summer when you're fighting a few fewer things in terms of the sports schedule. There's no ideal time for soccer. There's sports all the time. Is playing in the winter ideal? No, but there's a lot of places where playing in the summer these days is almost just as dangerous. So it's going to take some getting used to, but I think if MLS wants to get to where it envisions itself, and with the right amount of spending, like MLS becoming, say, the 5th best league in the world in the next decade, that's not an unreasonable goal, I don't think. But to do it, you've got to be aligned with the transfer market so that you're on an even playing field with the European teams you are competing with for players. Speaking of the World Cup and watching the World Cup, really fun piece of news here. If you missed it, the Fire are taking over Recess, the big indoor-outdoor bar in the West Loop at the corner of Kinsey and Peoria, for the entire World Cup. It is a 6-week-long watch party at Recess being hosted by the Fire. Once again, things that you can do when your owner is willing to spend a bunch of money, because God only knows what it costs to buy one of the most profitable bars in Chicago for a month and a half. I'm sure that was not a cheap check, but again, shout out Joe Mansueto. Fun things there. I'm sure there'll be lots of news leading up to that, but again, it's going to be one of those things. If you don't have other plans for any given day of the World Cup, you can just head over there and the Fire will have things all set up and going. All right, let's see. Anything else we got to get to before we get out of here? As I mentioned off the top, 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a season preview show that is going to be leading up to week 1 in Houston. So that show will be on a Tuesday ahead of the Saturday season kickoff game that weekend against the Dynamo down in Houston. And so keep an eye out from that. And instead of looking backwards like today was about, wanted to get all this out of the way so that when we get to 2 weeks from now, we can talk X's and O's. We can talk about the tactics, what we think we might see, and what we can expect from the Fire in 2026. If you're watching this show right now live on YouTube, stick around for CHGO Stars. That is coming up next. It's going to be a lot more of this. It's going to be like this show, me talking kind of nonstop about all the things going on in the offseason. The Stars arguably have a longer list of stuff to get to than the Fire even do. That's going to go live in about 15 minutes. If you are listening to this wherever you get your podcasts, how about you go listen to the Star Show as soon as you get done listening to this one? Because that's going to do it for this first CHGO Fire episode of 2026. Shout out to Sean Anderson on the ones and twos behind the scenes making this thing go. Thank you to everybody for watching, for listening, and for hanging out with us here today. I'm Alex Campbell saying so long, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the season preview.
We all silly like the mayor.